Hey you guys, welcome to book review 103. I'm really starting to do a lot of these from my cars. I promise you I'm not homeless to start. But today I will be reviewing Pacific Rim's Beermen Ballin in Flip-Flops in the Philippines Unlikely Love Affair with Basketball by Rafe Bartholomew. Okay, so in this book, Rafe got a fellowship to go to the Philippines and essentially follow the Philippine Basketball Association for an entire year, in addition to kind of following sort of the local culture of the Philippines. And it's really an interesting book in that anyone that's a basketball junkie will love it. Anyone that loves kind of the more obscure side of sports will really love it. Anybody that kind of likes playing horse and doing a lot of trick shots will love Rafe's description of the PBA. To get into it, the Philippine Basketball Association is the second oldest league, I believe, in the world. Or maybe just the Philippines are the second oldest country to play basketball after the United States. Being that the Philippines were a colony of the United States after the Spanish-American War at the turn of the last century. So being colonial, whatever, aggressors, if you will, basketball was incorporated into the culture of the Philippines to the point where there's basketball hoops on every street corner. A lot of times they're just made with like plywood. A lot of the courts are just like tamped down dirt courts. The balls are smooth and worn thin, you know, because a lot of people in the Philippines are very poor. They can't replace them. Another kind of cultural interesting thing about basketball in the Philippines is that those are sort of like the backyard courts, but politicians know where their bread is buttered and actually will build cement courts kind of right next to city halls or sort of like as almost public meeting spaces. Most of the time they're covered because it rains a lot in the Philippines, being in the tropics. And so kind of a lot of the center of life revolves around basketball in the Philippines. So much so that these courts not only are held for basketball events, having, you know, a couple, you know, maybe like 100 bleachers or, you know, just area for spectators to watch. But also they serve other purposes, such as like wedding ceremonies, or there's been funerals that have been taking place on basketball courts in the Philippines. That was mentioned. A lot of times, if there's like, it serves almost like the purpose of like a city hall, if you will. Where the local residents of a smaller municipality, I mean, we're not talking like the entirety of Manila, but of a smaller municipality, either rural or urban, can gather and kind of discuss what's going on in their neighborhood or town or whatever. It's even used at times as a agricultural storage area. Well, not even storage area, but, you know, rice is very, I guess I'll just explain it. Rice is very big in the Philippines, and to grow rice, you have to dry it out before you can husk it. And rather than keeping it on roads, which a lot of times will be run over by trucks, which help in the husking process, but will often be detrimental to the grain, or, you know, obviously it's kind of dangerous for trucks to be constantly driving over agricultural products and cars and stuff. They dry them out on these basketball courts, the additional advantage being that most of the time that they're covered. But anyway, that's sort of the cultural background of the Philippines. Oh, I should also mention a lot of times these courts that are built by the government are in funds that should be going to like hospitals or, you know, police departments or roads, are often gone to onto basketball courts, which kind of shows you the sort of I hate to say it's a little bit backward mindset of the Philippines, but it's also very endearing. Wow, that sounded so condescending, but it kind of creates this crazed basketball culture, I guess is what I'm saying. And the pinnacle of that is the PBA, the Philippine Basketball Association, where the top players across the islands of the Philippines compete against one another in essentially the equivalent of like the NBA. Now, a couple kind of odd things about this league. I mentioned earlier on that it's like a game of horse, if you will. There's a lot of trick shots in the PBA, and that primarily being that dunks happen, and there are certainly dunks that make the crowd go wild, but they're less common than in the NBA, where the dunk or the three-point shot, which is also popular in the PBA, are sort of like the pinnacle of a run or a great play. A lot of times a crazy like hook shot with a spin or something behind your back 15 times. Maybe not 15 times, but like the sort of showmanship side of basketball really is very prevalent in the Philippines. The Showtime Lakers would be a big hit. So Mike Cortez is one of the players on this team. Rafe Bartholomew follows, I think it's Raf Bartholomew, but whatever, follows the Alaska Aces, which is one of the Philippine basketball teams. Now, the reason they're called Alaska is actually not to do with the state, but this kind of mentioned early on, has to do with the Philippine kind of slang word for, or it's two slang words combined for milk corporation. And now a lot of teams in the PBA don't have names like the Chicago Bulls or the Manila Rattlers or whatever, but are actually named after their corporate sponsors. So they'll be like the Alaska Aces, which used to be the Milkmen. The Beermen Ballin is a reference to the San Miguel Beermen, which is another basketball team. There's the Red Bulls, obviously named after the energy drink. The Talk and Text, which is like the big cell phone company and they call them the Talk Boys or something. I don't know. It's named after them in the Philippines. So anyway, kind of the structure is that you can have locally born Philippine players, or what they call Phil-Ams, which were very controversial when they were introduced, in that they can come from the United States or even another country, though they're called Phil-Ams, so long as one parent is nationally Filipino. So either a father or mother has to have and not naturalized Philippine citizenship, but was born in the Philippines and moved abroad and then had the kid. So that kind of adds some additional talent to the league. But really the stars of the league are the imports. Now there are 3 seasons that they play in the PBA. There's the no import season, 1 import season, and 2 import season. As it implies, there's no imports in the first season. Then the second and third season, there's 1 and 2. And what essentially the imports are, they're the ringers. They're the stars. They're the ones that are brought in that are expected to score at minimum 25 or 30 points a game. A lot of pressure is put on them, but as should be, they're the highest paid players. They're often the players that just didn't quite make the NBA that are trying to earn a living overseas before their basketball years. And now the player on this team, on the Alaska Aces, is named Ro Ellis, and he's kind of a veteran overseas basketball player, kind of a gritty forward type, gets a lot of rebounds, hustling. And it really mentioned in the book that there are 2 types of imports. There are imports like Ro. I should mention that Ro, kind of his setback, why he couldn't quite make the NBA, is because for a power forward or kind of a bigger, kind of jockeying inside guy, he's only 6'5", which is undersized. And the other thing is he's not a great outside shooter, but he does everything, kind of all the dirty work, plus anything within 10 feet. He can score. He can definitely defend, one of the best import defenders in the league. And yeah, can just score at will, but just not in the way that the NBA is really looking for. But yeah, I did mention in the book that there are 2 types of players. There's the ones like Ro, the guys that couldn't quite cut it in the NBA. And then there's the guys that could make it in the NBA, but because of various personal problems, had a falling out. The most famous being Willie Ray Bates, a player that played for the Portland Trail Blazers. I think he did not play during their championship year, but shortly thereafter, kind of the Bill Walton years of the Portland Trail Blazers. Anyway, was from a super poor sharecropping community in Mississippi, black family, dad, drunkard, and essentially when he started making it into the league and stuff, he just had no context for knowing how to be responsible with your money or your life. And he was constantly an alcoholic, womanizer, would show up late for practice. And you feel kind of both sides in this Billy Ray Bates story. And the reason that kind of he goes on about this is it's the most shining example of something that commonly happens in the Philippine Basketball Association. But it's a player that kind of you feel bad for because he didn't know the context, but at the same time you say, no, you should clean your life up. And actually those players are the ones that normally don't last. Or if they do last, they last a few spectacular seasons like Billy Ray Bates did, and then wash out into another league because they wear thin in the Philippines. Let me think. Yeah, so that's kind of Billy Ray Bates' story. Kind of the other sort of interesting cultural thing that happened in this book is just kind of the difference between Filipino culture and American culture. It's much more hectic, much more, I don't want to say smog ridden or whatever, but it's just very, very different. And kind of, you can see this in the way that the Phil-Am players and the native Filipinos act before and after games. The Phil-Am players tend to be very sort of carousy, kind of much more feely almost. And the example that Raf used is like on a couch after the game, they'd all be hugging one another and be laying on each other's laps and all sorts of stuff. Whereas being a Westerner, which the Phil-Ams were, and most of the imports are, they're very much sort of sit on the couch and you're in your box and you sit next to the person next to you and there's the person next to you. But there's no sort of this kind of, there's jocularity, but you give players a distance. The most stunning example of this in the book was Willie Miller, who was the star Filipino guard for Alaska, the team that Rafe followed. Not being an import, that's Roe. But he was sort of a kind of one of those players that drives coaches crazy, in that he had all the gifted talent in the world, and not only that, he did all the little things. Well, he didn't always do the little things, but he was a very smart basketball player. Like, it wasn't like he was just talented and then kind of lazy. He was very motivated, but very skilled, but sometimes a little loose or boneheaded. He'd do way too many crossovers, or he'd always be joking around and not really take his coaches seriously. But at the same time, be able to put up 30 or 35 points. Well, maybe not that many, but put up high 20 numbers in a game for scoring. And so kind of what this Alaska Aces coach, I believe his name was Cone, Mr. Cone, can't remember the first name. He essentially had two sort of competing types to lead the team. Roe, who was the gritty kind of American import that's like, by hook or crook, we're going to win this game. And then Willie, kind of the freestyling, more from the PBA streets style. And they mentioned that a lot, that the local players, because there's all these spin moves and crazy moves in the league, a lot of that has to do with just how they grew up playing basketball, because that's how basketball is played. If there's a banyan tree 5 feet from your basket, that's a defender in the local leagues in the Philippines, if you don't have like a court built for you. So yeah, there was that sort of like tension between the two, and it actually, well, I'll say one more thing. I gotta talk about the transvestites. The sort of one thing that Rafe mentioned kind of culturally in the book was the importance of kind of ladyboys in the Philippines, which most people kind of know about. But they made up the biggest cheering section of the team, which I thought was insanely awesome. And he actually saw an exhibition game that was sort of like a low-level, almost like Harlem Globetrotters game, where it was midgets versus transvestites, or midgets versus cross-dressers. And, you know, the game was staged, but all the fans had a lot of fun because of all of the hooting and hollering going on. And I was laughing at that too, and he laughed at it, but he did feel a tinge of guilt, which I feel a tinge of guilt too. But it is funny, the idea of these very effeminated men going up against 3-foot tall midgets. Yeah, that's funny. Okay. He also mentioned he went to the Borquet. I'm kind of rambling here, but he went to the Borquet, which is a famous resort area, and actually played in a couple tournaments. And he would play like a bunch of pickup games. And he kind of talked about the graft that went in with playing these local pickup games. You know, like the organizers of the events would just tell the referees, "Hey, call it for our team," and that's kind of how it went down. And actually, at the end of the one of the tournament that he was in Borquet, he was so upset that, you know, he left his boxers up, but he pulled his gym shorts all the way down after his 5th or 6th foul, after fouling out, and walked off the court. And even though they lost the semifinals of the game, he was remembered as sort of the hero of the tournament for sort of pulling this ridiculous move against kind of the corruption of the referees, which a lot of the fans really took to heart, because it kind of mirrored the corruption that goes on in Philippine society. And so anyone that kind of stands up against that is kind of their hero, which I thought was great. But sort of the book climaxes, I really got to get going. The book climaxes with Alaska. As I mentioned, that was just a tournament that he was playing locally, that Rafa was playing locally. Climaxes with the Alaska playing 2 teams. It was first Ginebra, which is sort of the New York Yankees of Philippine basketball, in that they'll outnumber their fans 95-5 percentage-wise in a 10,000-seat arena or 20,000-seat arena whenever they play, and they're very loud, and they play a momentum up and down court style basketball, which feeds into the momentum of the fans. And you can beat them, but you just feel kind of overwhelmed in doing so. And needless to say, Alaska did that, much to the chagrin of the huge Ginebra, or Ginebra, depending on how you pronounce it, fan base, and met Talk and Text in the finals, and actually beat them in 7 games. And kind of it culminated in Willie Miller and Rowe, as I mentioned earlier, going head-to-head with Cone in there, and really the team, after they were down 3-2 in the series, looking like they were going to, and down in Game 6, I believe, too, looking like they were going to split, like the Rock was going to split, the team was going to fall apart, and they were going to lose in the finals. But they brought it all together, you know, the strength through adversity, and were able to get Willie Miller back in his sort of freestyling, free-flowing, high-scoring game. Rowe, who had been import for 10 years and never won a international championship, finally got his hands on a ring, and played hustle, lights out all the way. And yeah, it was a good book. I would mention the 2 stars. There's also a bunch of, I mentioned Mike Cortez, Caruso, Blezo? Oh, I don't know. There's a ton of interesting kind of side characters that are in the game too, be it for, you know, like 19-year-old kind of street kids coming up to 15-year veterans that are 20 pounds overweight. You know, it's just a very interesting kind of milieu of a team, and that's true for all the PBA, because it's not as buttoned down as the NBA is, because it just doesn't have the cachet, I guess. So you gotta make it fun. It's kind of like the old ABA. That's the way I compare it to. Anyway, Pacific Rims, Beermen Ballin and Flip-Flops, in the Philippines' Unlikely Love Affair with Basketball, by I believe it's Raf Bartholomew. All right, thanks guys. Peace out. See you next time.